When Karoline Leavitt said, "Shut up, girl," Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She stopped the studio, faced the country, and turned a throwaway remark into a cultural earthquake. Everyone on set knew something had just broken because the lights were too bright and the air was too still. They had just been on the air for 24 minutes when they started a political roundtable that was supposed to appear like a real argument. But this one had teeth. The moderator was having a hard time keeping things civil, but the temperature kept growing. Karoline Leavitt, who was sitting at the far right of the panel, leaned forward in her chair with her arms crossed tightly and her fingers tapping on the table as if she were holding something back. Representative Jasmine Crockett was halfway through making a point about immigration reform and the differences in funding between southern areas. She was quiet but firm. She spoke carefully and based on experience, not talking points. You could see she wasn't attempting to get attention. She was trying to talk to someone. That was when it happened. Karoline's jaw tightened. She moved the mic closer and yelled, "Shut up, girl," cutting Jasmine off in the middle of a sentence. You could hear someone in the control room take a deep breath. The moderator blinked quickly, not sure if he should step in or let it go. Jasmine didn't even blink. She stopped talking, quietly closed her mouth, and slowly turned to face Karoline. The moment seemed to last forever. You could sense the stress through the television. A producer dropped a pen behind the scenes, which scared the cameraman. They kept the shot wide, but the mood had changed dramatically. Karoline looked back, smirking a little, as if she thought she had one, but the smile was apprehensive. Her heel was tapping on the floor. She wasn't sure whether she had gone too far, but she wasn't going to turn back either. Not yet. Jasmine still didn't say anything. Not right away, though. 7 seconds of silence felt like a lifetime on live TV. Jasmine then tilted her head a little toward the camera and began to talk, but not to Karoline. She was speaking to the millions of people watching. Her voice was steady, but her face was hard to decipher. Not mad, not shook, but her comments had a lot of weight. Something quiet that made everyone move on. "You know what's crazy?" she said. "It's always the same tone, the same kind of time. She talks too clearly and too confidently, and all of a sudden she's too much." Karoline moved in her chair, but Jasmine didn't turn around. Jasmine went on, "When I was 13, a substitute teacher told me to shut up when I asked a question about a test. She didn't like the way I talked. She stated I sounded sharp, which she thought was a bad thing. I never forgot it." She stopped again and kept staring straight at the camera. "No," she said, "I won't stop talking. Not for you. Not for those like myself who have made a living by talking over people." The room stayed quiet. The moderator didn't say anything. Karoline didn't move either. It was one of those times when you didn't need to yell to make your point. Don't holler. No show business. Just hefty words. Words that hovered in the air like smoke. People at home didn't grab the remote. They leaned in. People sat with their mouths slightly open in living rooms, barbershops, break rooms, and classrooms, attempting to understand what had just transpired. Interns at media companies were already cutting and posting video of the scene on Twitter. The caption was always something like, "She didn't even raise her voice." What was supposed to be simply another heated part of the show had quickly turned into a national firestorm. But what made Jasmine's answer hurt even more was everything that had been going on behind the scenes, the stress, the past, and the things that had not been expressed. The panel took place in a recently remodeled Dallas affiliate studio with smooth floors, brilliant ring lights, and brushed metal decor that tried too hard to look neutral. 2 big networks shared the set, and the crew was used to watching politicians fight. But no one on staff that day could have known that what they were filming would be shown on morning shows for the next 2 weeks. The program was supposed to address the usual topics, such border security, the economy, and how the federal money doesn't reach communities that need it most. But even before Karoline aired her bombshell, the talk had already begun to break down. 4 people were sitting next to each other, the moderator in the middle, Karoline on the left, and Jasmine on the right. The other two panelists, an economist from El Paso and a sheriff from Tucson, basically faded into the background as the two ladies got more and more tense. Karoline had been jabbing from the start, not with loud noises, but with those low shots that are supposed to get you angry without being too obvious. She looked at Jasmine and continued, "I just think some people would rather make the border a political issue than fix it." Jasmine retained her cheerful tone. "If you mean me, say it directly." That got a few people to raise their eyebrows. Karoline smiled and went on, but everyone who paid attention could see where it was going. Later in the program, Jasmine talked about what it was like to be in holding centers in Brownsville, using a trip she did a month before as an example. She talked about mold on the walls, a toddler who was coughing a lot, and a young mother who hadn't been able to take a shower in 6 days. Karoline moved again, leaned in closer to her mic, and whispered with a light laugh, "Come on. Let's stick to facts, not sad stories." The moderator tried to stop them. He didn't need Jasmine. "Facts?" she asked. "I was there. That weekend, you were tweeting from Palm Beach." That's when the air got thicker. It wasn't just about policy anymore, it was personal. The kind of tension that can't be fixed in post. But what got lost in all the anger that followed the shut-up girl insult was the subtle building of disrespect. To actually get the full effect of Jasmine's calmness, you had to see it all in order. This wasn't just about one sentence, it was about a lot of hidden ones. When Karoline called Jasmine's points dramatic, she was quoting real-life numbers. Karoline kept talking over her, even when the moderator requested for equal time. She wouldn't look him in the eye until it was time to stop. And beneath all of that, Jasmine was young, black, vocal, and unabashedly ready. The producers could feel it becoming hot. Carla, one of the camera operators, whispered to her coworker, "She's about to say something she can't take back." But they were already live. So, when Karoline finally shouted it, "Shut up, girl," it didn't seem like an explosion. It was like the last step down a stairway she'd been traveling all segment long. She didn't say it out loud. It wasn't yelled, but the tone, harsh, contemptuous, and just casual enough to hurt, made it worse. It seemed like it was deserved. The people in the studio didn't know if they should cut to a commercial or keep the shot. The moderator's mouth opened a little, but he stared off camera, waiting for a cue that never came. The MC uncomfortably tried to sum up what everyone had said at the end of the segment, but no one was paying attention. Everyone in the studio was still thinking about the moment that had just broken across the room like a broken wire. The lights faded a little, and the mics went off. For a second, you could hear someone in the back say, "She really said that on live TV," but no one answered. Everybody was looking at Jasmine. She didn't get up. She didn't look at her phone. She just took her mic off and gave it to the assistant without saying a word. Her face was hard to read. What happened on the air wasn't the only thing that made this moment stick. It was how people reacted once the camera stopped. The gap for commercials felt like a fake quiet. At first, no one moved. Jasmine stayed in her seat, her fingers lightly pressing on the edge of the table. Her eyes were down, but she was awake. The stress was still there. It was still like something alive in the room. Karoline got up too fast. Her earpiece almost fell out, and she tried to adjust it while pretending not to see the calm eyes on her. She reached for her water bottle, missed, and let out a harsh sigh, as if she were the one who had been wrong. A floor manager came in with a clipboard and pretended to chat about logistics, but they were actually simply trying to break the spell. He looked at Jasmine, then Karoline, and said something about lighting cues in a low voice. No one truly heard him. Jasmine carefully stood up, not in a dramatic way, but in a deliberate way. She questioned one of the crew workers, a young woman with headphones on and gnawing her nails. "Restroom?" The woman blinked. Yes. This way, Congresswoman." Karoline saw her go away. She had a tight jaw, and it wasn't because she was proud of what she had said. Anyone who was paying attention could see that. She seemed like she was getting ready for something bad to happen. She took out her phone, tapped it once, twice, and then put it back in her bag without looking at the screen. She still hadn't gotten the reaction she wanted. Jasmine didn't cry in the bathroom, did not swear. She leaned forward and unbuttoned her blazer while standing in front of the mirror. She said to herself in a low voice, "You good. You're fine. Say what you need to say and let it land." She slowly washed her hands, dried them, took out her phone, and scrolled just long enough to realize that the tape was already on 2 political Twitter accounts. It was getting very popular. But what mattered were the comments. Different people had different reactions. Some anger, a little bit of snark, a bunch of gifs of she ate. Yeah, she knew what would happen next. Karoline tried to act like nothing was wrong when she got back to the studio. She started talking loudly to the sheriff on the panel, acting like she was laughing at something on her phone. The sheriff nodded, but didn't really pay attention. The economist didn't look up from his notes. The energy felt weird, like being stuck at a family meal after someone said something you couldn't forgive. Jasmine came back after that, calmed down, gathered, put the blazer back on, and the crew stopped talking again. The producer leaned in with a last-minute proposal before the host could say, "That's it." "Let her talk," he said quietly. "There's no discussion. Just her." The host stopped. "Are you sure?" The producer nodded. "She deserves it." When the show came back following a break, Jasmine had the last minute, and that minute developed into a message that no one saw coming. She didn't waste time going over what Karoline said. She didn't bend down. "I want to use this last minute to talk to the girls who are watching this, especially the ones who have been called too loud or too much for speaking up," she added. Her voice was calm but clear. Not angry, but a deep, steady voice that needed to be heard. Being honest doesn't mean you don't respect others. Being smart doesn't mean you are dangerous. And just because you're a woman with something to say doesn't mean you should ever let someone tell you to shut up. Not in school. Not at work. Not even in Congress. Karoline, who was seated across from her, stopped pretending to check her phone. "I speak for people who have had to fight for the right to speak at all," Jasmine said. "And I'm not going to make myself smaller so that someone else feels taller." The camera progressively moved closer. "So if you're watching this and someone has ever made you feel small for having an opinion, I just want you to remember that they only try to silence the voices they fear the most." The screen went blank. There is no outro music. No more small talk. Just one moment that stuck with viewers long after the screen went dark. Twitter was already going crazy. Every second, more and more people were reposting the film on Instagram. In less than an hour, the original 60-second clip had 1 million views. But it wasn't just about becoming viral. It was about more than that. Parents began to show it to their children. The next film morning, teachers played it more in class. People stopped in airports and laundromats to watch it over and over again. But what happened behind the studio doors after the show was over was just as interesting as what people watched on camera. There was no applause when the cameras finally stopped. No shaking hands, no grins that aren't real. It's the kind of silence that feels heavy, like everyone is trying to act like they didn't just see something break wide open. The producer took off his earpiece and said, "Well, that's going to be fun to clean up." The host stayed in his chair. He looked over his notes for a long time before softly pushing them aside as if they were no longer useful. "The questions you meant to ask at the end?" Not important. Real life had run them over. Karoline swiftly got back up. She looked around and then went directly to the green room. She didn't wait for a producer. She didn't pay attention to Jasmine. She didn't say anything. But Jasmine stood still. She put her papers together neatly, clipped them together, and then moved to the young woman who was doing her cosmetics nearby. "Do I still have shine?" she asked, smiling a little. The woman laughed uncomfortably. "You look perfect." Jasmine nodded once, quietly. "Okay. I want to be perfect when people call me emotional." The phrase wasn't just for show. She really meant it. Karoline was already on the phone when she got back to the green room. She closed the door behind her. The sound was muffled, but the tone was clear, defensive, short, and her voice was going too quickly. She was in a hurry. She knew this would spread. Not with that video out there. Not with Jasmine's measured, televised mic drop ringing across all platforms. Karoline has seen it before, how quickly internet anger could damage a person's reputation. Especially when you didn't sound apologetic. A helper knocked on the door of the green room. "Miss Leavitt, we need your release form." Karoline didn't say anything. The show's social media manager was already getting a lot of messages from higher-ups in their network in the corridor. "Who put up the clip? We need an answer right away. Is the Congresswoman doing interviews?" News sites started writing headlines within 15 minutes. Nothing exciting yet, just the news. Karoline Leavitt instructs rapper Jasmine Crockett to quiet up on the air. No spin, just the facts. But the comments came in quickly and strongly. People weren't simply outraged, they were also let down. You may browse for hours and see the same line in numerous ways. "She really said that on national TV." Jasmine, on the other hand, was sitting in a folding chair in the makeup room, checking her email, emailing her chief of staff, and watching the storm grow online. A producer came in. Representative Jasmine looked up and said, "Crockett, 3 outlets have already asked for a statement. Do they want anger or context?" The producer thought for a moment. "Honestly, they want a quote that will get them attention." She agreed. "Then they can wait." She wasn't going to add fuel to the fire yet. She realized that if she rushed things, the story would turn into a fight between people. But if she waited a little longer, people could actually hear what happened. A few local news teams were already waiting outside the building at the studio exit. They smelled it right away. Jasmine's car was waiting in the back, but she stopped near the door and looked at her aide. She told them, "If anyone asks, tell them I'm not mad. I'm focused," she said, and she meant it. Karoline finally came out of the green room when she got back inside. Her eyes were watery. They weren't quite crying, but they were close. She didn't say goodbye to anyone on set before leaving through the side entrance with her phone in her hand. She didn't think there would be blowback this quickly. She assumed the moment would get lost in all the political noise. Instead, it had turned into the kind of film that stays in classrooms, HR training courses, and think pieces for months. Both women were trending on X later that night, but just one of them was being quoted for what she said. The other person was being called out for them. And no matter how hard Karoline attempted to change the subject, explain, or frame things differently, the phrase "shut up, girl" had already hurt. But even though social media was full of responses, something more natural started to unfold. People who really mattered started to speak up, and their voices impacted what the discourse was about. When Jasmine went home that night, she had 112 unread texts, 68 missed calls, and her Instagram DMs were broken. It wasn't simply people who worked for him or were his political buddies. Friends from high school. People who used to be students. People you don't know. In their own words, all the texts expressed the same thing: "I witnessed it, and thanks." The clip wasn't simply popular, it was the most popular. It was being re-edited on TikTok with slow motion effects and quotes and bold white letters on top of each other. Political channels were reacting to it live on YouTube. Journalists, celebrities, and even small-town pastors were talking about it on X. One account put up 2 videos next to each other, one of Karoline's outburst and one of Jasmine's response. The caption said, "One woman yelled. The other one displayed strength." In just 5 hours, that post got more than 3 million views. What about the comments? Some were mean. Of course, there are always. But most of them weren't about politics. They were about people. No one was talking about the rules for the border. They were discussing about how they had been talked to. At work, at school, in courtrooms, at home. A nurse in Des Moines commented, "This week a doctor told me I was too sharp when I asked about a treatment plan." A teacher in Bakersfield said, "Watching this made me feel seen." Last year, a male coworker told me to be quiet in front of my pupils. I didn't say anything. I wish I had Jasmine's calmness. A college freshman in Tucson wrote one of the most popular posts to the black girls on campus who are always told they are too loud, too emotional, and too aggressive. Look what happens when you stay still and speak clearly. Jasmine didn't only speak for herself. She answered for us. That post went viral with just the tag "not shutting up." It became a movement in a matter of hours. People were making movies and talking about occasions when they were warned to calm down, watch your tone, or you're being dramatic. The reactions weren't planned. They weren't part of a plan. Nobody was asking for money or selling a slogan. It was simply normal folks talking, like they finally had a chance to say something they had kept to themselves for years. And it wasn't just one group. Men also spoke up. A Navy veteran from Flagstaff said, "When I witnessed that moment, I thought of my kid. She's 11. She is smart. And I never want her to think she needs to make herself smaller to make someone else feel better." Even people who disagreed with Jasmine politically said, "She handled that better than I would have." The networks paid attention. 3 major shows asked to interview her within 24 hours. One late-night host even started their monologue with, "In a week of people shouting, one woman whisperer schooled the whole country." Karoline's comms team sent out a short statement saying, "I'm sorry that my words were taken out of context and that emotions ran high. I believe in strong debate, but also respectful dialogue." But it didn't work. People didn't believe it. The issue wasn't that people didn't understand what she said. It was that they understood it too well. And the people knew it. There were clips of her earlier performances that started to show up again, including occasions when she interrupted other guests or called ladies older than her. Always just a touch too harsh, a little too quick to judge. The story had taken on a life of its own. More than Karoline, larger than Jasmine. It turned into a conversation on how we talk to each other, how we pay attention or don't, and how power often tries to hide itself by being loud. A debate coach at a high school in Lansing played Jasmine's response in class that Friday. "Watch this," she urged, "and tell me what real power looks like." A sophomore raised her hand. "It looks like not blinking." The others in the room laughed softly, although there was some truth to it. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She had stayed still and talked plainly, and somehow that steady state had changed the ground. But there were deeper stories starting to come out behind the viral stats and popular tags, stories that have nothing to do with politics, but everything to do with being heard. Most people think that going viral will just continue for a weekend. If you're lucky, maybe a week. But this time, it was different. People weren't simply sharing Jasmine's moment online. It was starting something real in the actual world. Little Rock churches began to mention it in their Sunday services. Madison book clubs stopped reading literature to discuss about it. A group of retired women in Fresno converted their customary knitting circle into a chat about how they had been ignored or talked over at work. One of them, 76-year-old Gloria Mendez, who had worked in social services for 30 years, came up and said, "I've been called girl more times than I can count." Not meant with kindness. "Always meant to put me in my place," said another woman. "It's not even the word. They say it in a way that makes you feel like you don't belong in the room." There wasn't anything dramatic about these talks. They weren't very loud, but they were rough. And for a lot of individuals, it felt like a long-held weight had finally been lifted. A guidance counselor at a Detroit middle school played Jasmine's answer for a group of 8th grade students. One student quietly questioned, "So we don't have to smile when we're being talked down to?" The counselor said, "You don't have to smile at someone who is being rude to you. You owe them the truth, no matter how loud it is." That one sentence went around. People talked about it on blogs, stuck on signs for protests. By Monday, it will be printed on t-shirts. Jasmine didn't say anything during all of this. She didn't hurry through the interviews, did not publish videos of celebrations. She didn't say anything in public. That only made folks pay more attention. But she got a lot of letters at work. Not just emails, but real notes penned by hand. Some on ripped-up notebook paper. Some people typed, printed, and signed their full names. One came from a woman named Sadie, who lived in Oklahoma City. She said, "I'm 58 years old. In 1992, my boss instructed me to shut up, girl. I took it in. You made me wish I hadn't." Another came from a 14-year-old in Reno. "You didn't yell, and that made it stronger. My mom claimed you look like her mom. I want to be like that when I grow up." And maybe the most poignant came from a man in Bismarck, North Dakota. "I've used that phrase before. I never knew how full it could be. Thank you for teaching me something I should have known a long time ago." These letters were more than just reviews. They were like mirrors, revealing how one moment on TV had made individuals think about their own lives, their own quiet times. Politicians tried to box the event in by turning it into a debate about censorship, decorum, free speech, and media bias. But everyday folks weren't following those scripts. They were making their own. A Sacramento community organizer put on a storytelling night called "The Last Time Someone Tried to Silence You." There were 3 times as many people there as normal. No microphones. People just took turns sitting in foldable chairs. A woman shared a story about a professor who would talk over her every time she spoke in class. Another person talked of her first job interview when she was told she was too sure of herself to work with others. And once more, Jasmine's name came up. Not as a famous person, not even as a politician, but as a sign of holding back, of clear, of honor. This wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't finished. It was a disaster, but it was real, and a lot of people suddenly said, "That's how I felt," but never had the words to say it. The pause that people heard all around the country. Not the comment, not the return. But that pause, the space Jasmine held, refusing to react right away and letting the weight of contempt lay there for everyone to feel. That quiet spoke more than a yell ever could. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Not yet. There was a reason she didn't speak up. And when she finally decided to talk again, it wasn't to get attention. It was for the truth. It wasn't a morning show on a network. It wasn't news on cable. Jasmine didn't pick the biggest platform. She picked KMOV St. Louis, a regional station that is noted for its simple interviews and lack of flair. There were only 2 chairs, a dark blue background, and one presenter who let people finish their comments. She didn't bring a lot of people with her, just her legislative aide, a small folder of notes, and her own voice. Brian Clifton, the host, started off quietly. "Thank you for being here, Congresswoman Crockett." She smiled. "Thanks for talking, not arguing." And with that, they started. Not the moment that went viral, at least not at first. Brian asked her about her childhood instead. "When I was a kid in Dallas, her dad was a welder. At night, her mom worked at the post office." Jasmine said that even when her parents fought about expenses at the kitchen table, they still found time to show me how to use my voice without raising it. She talked about her first time in court as a young public defender and how she understood that being clever wasn't enough. "I was ready when I stepped in, but I could sense that some people had already made up their minds about me before I even spoke." Then the question came, "You've been quiet since that broadcast. Most people would have taken advantage of the chance. Why didn't you?" She stopped for a moment and then said slowly, because it wasn't about clapping back. It was about what it signified. At that time, there was no fight between 2 women. It was a mirror. Brian leaned in. "Who is a mirror for?" She said, "For everyone. For everyone who has ever been advised to tone it down when they were simply being honest. For those who have been taught that being quiet is a sign of professionalism, and for those who think that being dominant is the same as being strong." She didn't move. She talked about policing tone, about being called aggressive for looking someone in the eye, about emails she got that started with, "You'd be more likable if." And then she went back to Karoline, not to roast her or condemn her, but to explain what those 3 words meant. People don't always mean only you when they say, "Shut up, girl." It's something that happens in generations. It's part of the culture. It's written in code. Whether they know it or not, it goes back. "Do you think she meant it that way?" Brian said. Jasmine turned her head. "I think she meant to hurt me. Whether she knew how deep the blade went, that's a different story." She didn't remain with Karoline. She focused her mind on what would happen next. The pupils are writing in. The grandmother's crying in texts on the phone. The young professionals said they felt like they had sat in that studio chair too. But the most moving part was near the conclusion when Brian asked, "What would you say to your 15-year-old self, the one in history class, who was being called loud?" Jasmine smiled, not the type you give for cameras, but the kind that comes out when you think about something true. Tell her to keep asking questions. That one day someone will cut you off. Someone will try to make you look bad. Instead of breaking down, you're going to look them in the eye and remind them, and everyone else, why your voice counts. The room was quiet. No one clapped. No music that makes you feel sad. A woman just speaking the kind of truth that sticks with you. That night, the station's website got the interview. No aggressive title, no clickbait. But it spread, not because it was viral, but because it was true. Teachers, community leaders, and even clergy posted clips. It was shown on screens in waiting rooms, barbershops, and business lobbies. And every time someone watched, they didn't get angry. It was clear. No one was yelling anymore. They were shaking their heads, paying attention, thinking. The interview was important because it made people stop and think about why it affected them so deeply, not because it described what happened. Karoline, on the other hand, was not being silent either, even though Jasmine talked with confidence and purpose, and what she said next would make people across the country pay attention in a whole new way. Karoline came back 3 days after Jasmine's interview aired, this time not from a news desk or a campaign podium, but from a home studio in Scottsdale, Arizona. She was sitting in front of an American flag backdrop, which was framed by a library full of policy books and images that looked overly staged. She let out a sigh at first. Not the sort that says, "I'm sorry," but the kind that says, "Let me tell you why I'm the victim." She started by saying, "These last few days have been hard." Her tone was rehearsed but not sure. And I want to be clear. Not as a commentator, not as a member of the GOP, but as a woman who was unfairly dragged for a moment that was blown way out of proportion. She went on to say that the media response was fake outrage and that she was the object of a political pylon. Karoline said that individuals who thrive on division had turned her remarks into a cultural crisis and used them as weapons. Then came the defense everyone had been waiting for. When I said, "Shut up, girl," it wasn't about her race, her gender, or anything deeper than the heat of a live debate. Was it blunt? Of course. But let's be honest, politics isn't a nice sport. She leaned forward as her voice got tighter. We need to stop acting like every off-the-cuff comment is a serious problem in society. We're grown-ups. We should be able to fight without turning it into a speech about civil rights. That line didn't go over well. The internet lit up right away, but not with support. It was with tiredness. A lot of her own viewers didn't believe it. Some conservatives who had supported her at first were now discreetly pulling away. People on both sides pointed out that her apology wasn't really an apology. It was a lecture that looked like one, and the numbers were true. People watched her announcement video a lot, but the comments area was a war zone. A few people wrote, "Just say you're sorry and move on." Some people said, "You're way off base." A comment that gained thousands of likes said, "This isn't about you anymore." The next day, Karoline was on a lot of media outlets, including radio shows, podcasts, and conservative blogs. But every time I tried to look at the occasion in a way, it didn't work. It wasn't her political views that were the problem. It was her inability to realize that the way she spoke, casually dismissive language, was a sign of something much deeper than she wanted to admit. The host of a Tampa-based political podcast that is also a syndication asked her directly, if you could go back, would you use different words? She took too long to think. I would have probably said the same thing, but in a softer way. There it was. That word's played again and over on news networks, but in a softer way. It hit the ground with a thud because the message wasn't that she had thought about it. She still didn't get why people were angry. Jasmine still hadn't answered, at least not directly. That stillness was louder than Karoline's whole press trip. An unnamed advisor to Karoline later told a reporter that the team was upset. We told her to just say sorry, take the heat, and move on. But she kept going. She thought she could turn it into strength. It wasn't working. At one point, a conservative women's group that had backed Karoline in earlier races gave her a mild scolding, saying they were disappointed in how she acted when she needed to show grace. Even her admirers were raising questions in private. Why couldn't she just say sorry? Why not do the right thing? The explanation was clear. Karoline had not realized how powerful calmness might be. She thought that loudness and haste would beat silence. She didn't understand the room. And then she got the whole country wrong. And yet, even with all the backlash, the network saw a chance. They asked both women to come back to the same stage, this time for a broadcast town hall meeting in Cincinnati. Karoline said yes right away. It took Jasmine 3 days to say yes. The producers called it a national discourse about respect, power, and the language we use. It was supposed to be polite, in charge, mediated. But no one knew what would happen when these two women, who had become symbols of a broader societal reckoning, saw each other again. But when they finally met, the crowd wasn't shocked by sparks or yelling. It was what Jasmine said to Karoline's face, with everyone in the country watching. There were too many people at the University of Cincinnati auditorium, students from the area, journalists from all throughout the country, teachers who aren't working, engineers who have retired. People from all around the country had come to this town hall. The people in the crowd weren't loud. They weren't here for the show. They were here because, for once, things felt real. There were 2 chairs on the stage, 6 feet apart. There was a low table between them. No extras. There was only wood, fabric, and the weight of a debate that had gotten out of hand. Karoline was the first to leave. She donned a navy suit that was sharp but basic. Her body was tense. She smiled on purpose. She peered out at the throng like she was looking for friends. After that, Jasmine got on stage. This time, no blazer. A plain maroon blouse. Hair pulled back. She didn't wave back. She sat down and gazed straight ahead. Calm, like someone who wasn't there to perform but to get something done. The moderator said hello to each of them. Tonight isn't about ratings. It's not about going viral. It's about the space between disagreement and dignity. He asked a few questions to get things going. Both women stayed in charge. Karoline went over her concerns regarding free speech and political discourse again. Jasmine talked on policy like housing, healthcare, and education. But everyone was waiting for that time. At last, the moderator spoke to Jasmine. Congresswoman Crockett, now that you're both here, is there anything you'd like to say to Miss Leavitt? The room got tense. People picked up their phones. Heads bent forward. Karoline gazed at Jasmine. Not through her. Not past her. But right at her. I've been thinking about this moment, she added gently. Not because I want an apology. Karoline moved her chair a little bit. But I believe in truth more than theater. You probably didn't think twice when you urged me to shut up, girl. You were angry. Maybe they're exhausted. Maybe they weren't ready. But I wasn't. Jasmine bent forward a little. I heard it, the same way every woman who has been belittled has heard it. I heard it the same way females do at school. The way black women hear it in meetings. People hear it when they are told to take up less space. Karoline tried to cut in. The moderator lifted his hand slowly. Jasmine went on. And I want you to be very clear about this. I'm not mad with you. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm here because you needed to understand how your remarks affected not just me, but also the people who wrote me letters, who cried while watching a video, who remembered things they had buried for decades. There was no noise in the auditorium. No noise. Don't whisper. Only 1,000 people breathing at the same time. Karoline sat quietly with her lips slightly apart, not knowing if she should say anything. Jasmine concluded what she was saying. She said, "You don't have to like me, but you have to treat me with respect, because the folks who sent me here didn't want me to be nice. Please represent them fully, loudly, and quietly, whatever the moment calls for." Then she leaned back. Karoline's face turned red. Not anger, but something harder to hide, being recognized. She cleared her throat as the moderator offered her an opportunity to speak. Her voice was tense. "I didn't know it would hurt that much," she remarked. "That's not a reason. That's just the truth." For once, she didn't try to justify it, change the subject, or put a twist on it. And that was, strangely, the most human thing she had uttered in weeks. The moderator nodded. "That's the beginning of something, not the end." The audience kept asking questions for the rest of the night. Some of the people weren't nice, some were rude. But both women were honest. There were no funny lines or applauding lines, and that's what gave the night its force. Nobody rushed the stage after the event. There were no winning laps, just calm talks in the parking lot. Students talked to each other about how they would deal with comparable situations. Parents sent texts to their kids. People walked carefully to their automobiles, still thinking. Later, a reporter from Columbus tweeted, "Nobody won that town hall, but we all learned something new, and a lot more awake." But neither of them got to say the last word in this story. It came from those who had seen, learned, and chosen to speak out in their own lives and in their own ways. 3 weeks after the town hall, the story was essentially gone from the news. The memes started to slow down. The next political scandal took the place of the hot hashtags, but something stayed with people not in the headlines, but in the way they talked to each other. A teacher in Springfield, Missouri, showed the whole town hall film to her civics class. It was 90 minutes long, not just cuts or highlights. She asked her students one question when the credits rolled: "How did you feel?" A sophomore raised his hand, like I needed to stop talking and listen. Another girl said she didn't make it about herself. She made it about everyone. At the same time, HR specialists in Oakland utilized the event as a case study in a work lecture. Not to cause trouble, but to talk about tone, context, and power. The words left and right never came up. It was no longer about politics. It was about people. A small community theater in Cleveland transformed the event into a short play. 2 ladies, 2 chairs, and an audience that heard actual words delivered under real stress. People were sad, people applauded, and no one checked their phones. This narrative did something that doesn't happen very often. It went too far. It came into the actual world, not just online or in hashtags, but also in church basements, classrooms, kitchen tables, and break rooms. Letters kept coming in. A woman from Boise wrote, "I used to stay quiet in meetings when men talked over me." A middle school administrator in Tampa commented, "We printed a quote from her interview and put it in every classroom. They only try to silence the voices they fear the most. The kids get it." A letter from a mother in Wichita was probably the most affecting. "My daughter wanted to know what tone policing meant. I informed her that when people say your volume is the problem, they are really saying your message is the problem." She said, "So Jasmine didn't let it happen to her, right?" "Yes," I answered. Jasmine didn't want to have another viral moment. She didn't run after photographers. She went back to work, writing policies, meeting with people, and striding around community centers in heels. All without saying a word. Karoline, on the other hand, stepped back from the spotlight. Not forever, but long enough to think about it. something her closest advisor stated she'd never seen her do before. She met with two women's rights groups in secret, not for a photo shoot, just to hear. That was the point of this whole story. It made people pay more attention, not just to other people, but also to themselves. What do we say when we're angry? Who do we bother when we feel scared? How often do we think that being loud means being a leader? And what is it about quiet that scares us the most? These questions aren't only for politicians. You can ask your neighbors, coworkers, friends, and siblings these questions, and maybe that's why it stayed. This wasn't a scandal, though. It wasn't a takedown. It was a time to face the truth. A brief, abrupt flash of reality that helped people stop acting like words don't matter. Because they do. They make rooms. They move power. They show us who we are when we aren't thinking and who we are when we are. This is the important part. You don't have to be on TV to be in the middle of something like this. Someone might cut you off during a meeting. Your voice might start to shake at the dinner table. It might be when someone talks down to you, not because of what you said, but because you had the guts to say it. And when that time comes, keep this in mind. You don't have to yell. You don't have to get back at them. You only need to talk clearly, calmly, and honestly. Because someone is paying attention. There is always someone. If this tale made you think, even a little bit, tell someone else about it. It might be a friend, a daughter, or a coworker. Tell them that their voice matters, even when the world tells them to be quiet.